Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to welcome y'all to the Bible study today. We're still in Ezekiel. We're going to be studying Ezekiel 13 today. It's not as long as some of the other lessons, but it's loaded with unbelievable things. I say unbelievable. I say they're very believable. They're unimaginable things is more like it. This section reminds me of Psalm 135 verses 15 to 18. It's about idols that are made with human hands. Let me read that to you. Psalm 135 verses 15 to 18. The idols of the nations are silver and gold, made by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, nor is there breath in their mouths. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all those who trust in them. Okay, this scripture says that these idols were made by men. They were made by human hands. I might add that they were designed and made with human hands. They were designed by humans and made with human hands. And at the very last verse, it says, those who make them will be like them, and so will all of those who trust in them. And I might add that it's really the other way around. Those that make them into their own image. They look like their maker, which means that the maker of these idols is their God. They make it to look like themselves. Okay, I guess that we're going to be studying about denunciation and judgment of the false prophets. All these people we've been talking about that have been leading the people of Jerusalem down the primrose path to disaster. We're talking about them, and those idols that we just read about in Psalm 135 are the same way. It's like they have no relevance and no reality to them at all. It's like the message that the false prophets have in chapter 13, in the book of Ezekiel, which we're going to study in chapter 13. Okay, the first 7 verses of chapter 13 of Ezekiel, verses 1 through 7, are about denunciation of false prophets. Verses 8 through 12 and verses 8 through 16 are made up of two subsections, verses 8 through 12 and 13 through 16. Their judgment against the judgment against them is declared in 2 stages. And then verses 17 to 19 is about condemnation of false prophets, and verses 22 to 23 is God's declaration of the judgment of the false prophets. So you're going to see as we go through here what God thinks of them and their message. Okay, verses 1 through 7 is about denunciation of false prophets. And I'd like to read to you verses 1 through 3. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the prophets of Israel. Who are now prophesying. Son of man, prophesy against the prophets of Israel who are now prophesying. Say to those who prophesy out of their own imagination, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the foolish prophets who follow their own spirit and have seen nothing. Very interesting when we talk about this. Okay, verses 1 and 2, I want you to remember from the original call to Ezekiel that he was in the midst of the exiles. So he was very aware of the presence of the false prophets. It's not like he's hearing somebody tell him about it. He's seen it firsthand. They had a message laced with less pain than the message of Ezekiel. In fact, they were teaching things we've talked about a little bit. There were 4 false beliefs that they were presenting to the people, and the people were biting in to a whole hook, line, and sinker. Their message was laced with less pain than the message of Ezekiel. It was easier to hear, easier to listen to, easier to accept than what Ezekiel was telling them. So the people could choose which message to accept. This means there is competition for followers. I say that using the term loosely on competition. It's not like Ezekiel is trying to win them over. In fact, he's told not to. If you recall, he's told not to rebuke them. He is only to tell them what God tells him to tell them. But the false prophets are in there trying to give them a message and trying to win the people over to follow them. What Ezekiel wants to follow is for them to follow God, not him, but follow God. It's probably not a good word to use, the word competition. The competition is to follow the false prophets or God. Following the message of the prophet of God means to follow God. So if they follow Ezekiel, that means they're following God. Okay, it is like the political promises of today. Don't worry about it. Just say it, and some people, believe it that it will happen as spoken. By the time you realize you've made the wrong decision or the wrong choice, it will be too late. And that's the way it is in a bad presentation from the government to the people. If they buy into it and accept it, by the time they realize that it may be the wrong decision, it's too late. And that's the message of the false prophets. By the time the people get to a point where they realize Ezekiel was right, they made the wrong decision, it's too late to change. Here the prophetic message opened with an exhortation to prophesy against or preach against the message of false prophets. They are not actually called false prophets, but they are referred to as prophets who preach a message of their own imagination. Do you remember when I read that? Let me read it again. He said, "Say to those who prophesy out of their own imagination." You know what that means? I'm dreaming up what I'm going to say. Hey, I got a bunch of beliefs here. I think I'll just present those to the people. I thought those up. It's not a message from God. Okay, and in verse 3, clarifies that they follow their own spirit or speak from their own minds and have not seen anything, meaning they have no message from God. They have not seen a vision from God. They have not received a message from God. It's out of their own imagination and of their own spirit. Think about that for a second. That means that they have not seen it. When I say they have not seen it, it means that they're just saying it. It's empty words. Okay, verses 4 through 7. Let me read verses 4 and 5. Your prophets, Israel, are like jackals among ruins. You have not gone up to the breaches in the wall to repair it for the people of Israel, so that it will stand firm in the battle of the day of the Lord. Their visions are false, and their divinations a lie. Even though the Lord has not sent them, they say the Lord declares, and expect him to fulfill their words. Boy, that's a very, very interesting thought to have. Rather than bring like true prophets who would build up the moral and spiritual lives of the people, he calls them jackals who prey on the people. Rather than help repair the breach in the wall, the spirit and moral decay, they just make it worse. So they're not trying to help the people, and these false prophecies, these false beliefs that they're presenting is not helping. Just because they say it doesn't make it better. It's actually making it worse because they're leading them into a wrong area that they should be in. Our verse 6 and 7. Their visions are false and their divinations a lie. Even though the Lord has not sent them, they say the Lord declares and expect him to fulfill the words. Have you not seen false visions and uttered lying divinations when you say the Lord declares, though I have not spoken? They sought to foretell the future by use of human devices, their own words. They just say it. They didn't get it from God. They didn't see a vision. They didn't hear a prophecy to deliver. They just make it up on their own. They used delusions from their own minds when God had not, in fact, spoken to them. And go back and look at the two verses, mostly verse 6 and verse 7. Their message is false and a lie. Verse 6 and 7. God had not sent them, meaning he had not called them. They just went into the business of prophesying without the hand of God being on them. The interesting point here is I believe their intentions are sinister and they are sent from Satan. But they may devoutly believe that what they say is being said as truth. It does matter what you believe. So what I'm trying to say is, even though they may have believed these four false delusions or these four false ideologies or false prophecies that they have been teaching and preaching to the people, does not make it true. Believe it as hard as you want, it's still not true. So they may be devout in their belief, but it's not true. I can only call your attention to Proverbs 16:25. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. The false prophets teach four false assumptions. False prophets teach four false assumptions which seem reasonable to God's chosen people, but he will destroy Jerusalem and he will bring judgment on his people. So when I say it sounds reasonable, these people, the four false assumptions play right into their hands. They're his chosen people. They're living under his covenant, which he can't break. We're living in the city that he will not allow to be destroyed because it's his city and that's where the temple is. And the day of the Lord means the day of victory for God and for Israel. So those sound great if you're an Israelite, because it goes right along with what you've believed all of your life. But the Bible is clear that goodness is measured against God as the standard, not man. Not man's idea of goodness, but God's idea of goodness. And the only way to avoid eternal punishment through faith is through faith in Jesus Christ. Now, they didn't know Jesus Christ at the time, but faith in God was still the standard. So let me ask you, does it make sense that God would eternally punish some people who feel they are good people? If you get to define what good means, then it doesn't. If you're not the one that gets to define what good is, then it doesn't make sense. But they're living under and people today are living on the idea that they get to define what good means. When we talk about being good, Jesus said none is good but God. He's talking about God's standard of goodness can't be met without faith in Jesus Christ. And so if you're ever talking to people about God, most of the time, if they're not living under faith in Jesus Christ, they're going to tell you, but I'm a good person. They just can't believe that God would punish a good person. And that's kind of how the Israelites were who were living in Jerusalem. We're God's chosen people and we're living in his town. There's just nothing going to happen to us. They're going to find out, and Ezekiel is telling them that is not true. You are his people, but it doesn't mean you're not going to be judged. All right, verses 8 through 16 are God's judgment against the false prophets. Let's look at verses 8 and 9. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, because of your false words and lying visions, I am against you. Now, he's not talking about Ezekiel. He's talking about the false prophets. Because of your false words and lying visions, I am against you, declares the sovereign Lord. My hand will be against the prophets who see false visions and utter lying divinations. They will not belong to the council of my people or be listed in the records of Israel, nor will they enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the sovereign Lord. Are you getting the idea? God does not like the false prophets nor their message. 3 things. They will not ever be a part of the council to the people. Their names will never go into the record, and we do not know who they are. So whoever those false prophets are, don't get to live in infamy. We do not know, we will never know who they were. They will not enter, and the third thing is they will not enter the land of Israel. In other words, they will be cut off, and no record of their personal ministry will remain. All right, let's look at verses 10, 11, and 12. Because they lead my people astray, saying peace when there is no peace, and because when a flimsy wall is built, they cover it with whitewash. Therefore tell those who cover it with whitewash that it is going to fall. Rain will come in torrents, and I will send hailstones hurtling down, and violent winds will burst forth. When the wall collapses, will people not ask you, where is the whitewash you covered it with? Woo. The false message applies to leading the people astray with their words, the flimsy wall that they've built to support the things that they've said, and the whitewash which covers up the truth rather than what the wall was made out of. It covers it up. The people follow after the truth. The people follow after the whitewash. It rains and washes off the whitewash so the truth can be fully seen. Then in verse 12, another way to say this, when the truth becomes known, but you said, not how it is, but you said. And when will that be? At the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. That is when the whitewash is going to wash off the wall, and the truth is going to be made painfully clear to them. The walls of Jerusalem are going to be torn down. The temple's going to be destroyed and burned. So is the city. So no matter how much whitewash was put on the wall, the figurative rain that's going to come is wash it off, and they're going to realize that they followed the wrong people, the message of the wrong people. Okay, verse 13 to 16. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In my wrath, I will unleash a violent wind, and in my anger, hailstones and torrents of rain will fall with the destructive fury. I will tear down the wall you have covered with whitewash, and will level it to the ground, so that its foundation will be laid bare. When it falls, you will be destroyed in it, and you will know that I am the Lord. Verse 15. So I will pour out my wrath against the wall and against those who covered it with whitewash. That would be the false prophets. I will say to you, the wall is gone, and so are those who whitewashed it. In verse 16, those prophets of Israel who prophesied to Jerusalem and saw visions of peace for her when there was no peace, declares the sovereign Lord. So this whole thing has been about a message of, even though Babylon, the Babylonian army is standing right outside the gate, so to speak, they're not coming in here. God won't let that happen. They're going to find out they are coming in. These verses are a further extension of the application of the prophecy of the wall to Jerusalem and its false prophets. God will bring down the wall, which is Jerusalem. He's going to bring it down. The people, the leaders, and the false prophets, those who whitewashed the walls, those who misled the people through false prophecy. Now listen to verse 17 to 19. You know, this may not apply, but I thought of it when I was reading this, and I can't get it out of my mind. So just let me tell you about 1 Corinthians 3. It's about the judgment seat of Christ, and it's talking about the foundation that you can build on. Paul said there's only one foundation, and that foundation is Christ. If your ministry is based on anything other than the foundation of Christ, in the end, it will not stand up. It will be destroyed. In that group of scriptures it talks about will be burned up. And that's the way the message of the false prophets is going to be measured. You brought the people down this primrose path, and now we're going to see that your message does not hold water. That message you put up on the wall, that foundation you put up on the wall, these four false prophecies, is not going to withstand time. It's going to be destroyed. Okay, so let's go on now to verse 17 to 19. Now, son of man, set your face against the daughters of your people who prophesy out of their own imagination. Prophesy against them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, woe to the women. We're talking about prophetesses now, false prophetesses. Okay? Say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, woe to the women who sew magic charms on all their wrists and make veils of various lengths for their heads, in order to ensnare people. Will you ensnare the lives of my people, but preserve your own? No, I don't think so. Verse 19 says, you have profaned me among my people for a few handfuls of barley and scraps of bread. By lying to my people who listen to lies, you have killed those who should not have died and have spared those who should not live. Okay, so not only do we have some false prophets, but we also have some false prophetesses that had their own message. And it talks about the magic charms they made and the bracelets and the hair beads and that sort of thing. They've got the same problem. They've ensnared people with a false message, and in the end, they're going to be punished as well. Magic charms and veils, I'm not sure what they mean, but it sounds like it's related to witchcraft, but it is associated with false prophecy and, the very least, the associated practices that go with it as well. Nevertheless, some kind of magic is involved. It is intended to ensnare people. They are paid. Barley and bread for their services. Okay, we're going to see verse 22 in a minute, but perhaps in addition to promises of peace, when there is no peace, they have killed the righteous and encouraged or spared the wicked. Just the opposite result, what you would want. You want those who are correct in their beliefs to be spared, and those who are following false prophets to be punished. And it's just the opposite. Those that the righteous have been destroyed and disheartened, and those encouraged or spared are the wicked. Okay. Verse 20 to 23, God's declaration of judgment. All right, this is a long section. So let me read it all. Just listen up. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against your magic charms with which you ensnare people like birds, and I will tear them from your arms. I will set free the people that you ensnare like birds. I will tear off your veils and save my people from your hands, and they will no longer fall prey to your power. Then you will know that I am the Lord, because you disheartened the righteous with your lies when I had brought them no grief, and because you encouraged the wicked not to turn from their evil ways and to save their lives. Therefore you will no longer see false visions or practice divination. I will save my people from your hands, and then you will know that I am the Lord. They have disheartened the righteous and encouraged the wicked to continue in the lifestyle that has brought the whole country to the place where they are, and they will be judged for it. The leaders will be judged for what they have done. The people are going to be judged for following them because they're following a lie. They're not following the truth of God. They're not going to be forgiven for being duped. They made a choice as adults to follow the false message. But this specifically says those who led them down the wrong path are going to be really judged. It's going to really be tough for them. Verse 21, God will take away their clientele. The people following the false prophets will be set free from that because the false prophets will no longer be in business. You know, part of this judgment, taking them out of Babylon, is to cut off the people from false visions and false teaching. So they won't have to be putting up with these prophetesses and false prophets again anymore. Their message will be shown to be an obvious lie when judgment comes, and the people will no longer follow them. Sadly, it will be too late to avert disaster. I think the only way to be led by a lie is to not know what the truth is. I guess that's all I have for you today. It's a serious thing. We're kind of finding out what God thinks about all of this evil message that the false prophets have. But I want to just mention one more thing to you. God has chosen to discipline Judah, and he chose to discipline them with an ungodly nation, Babylon. Now, Babylon is going to be disciplined by God at some point in the future as well, but he is using them to discipline the people now. These false prophets have a false message, and even though the people follow them and accept their message, they will still be judged for it, even though they were misled and duped into following something evil and not of God, which was proclaimed to be of God. Okay, that's all I have for you today. So next week we'll get into chapter 14. Thank you for being with me.